Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your hosts, Russell Martin and Brent Aiken. We are glad you're joining us today. We hope you find this conversation helpful, insightful, and encouraging as you continue to lead your students in ministry. We want to remind you, social media, check us out at Talk Student Men and check our website, studentministryconversations.org. Today, we're excited for a conversation that Brent had with Keith Parker. Keith is the student ministry team leader at Greenford Christian Church in Greenford, Ohio, and they sit down and talk about what it means to have a holistic view for your youth ministry. And so, Brent, can you tell us a little bit more about this conversation?
Yeah, so I sit down with Keith today and we talk about a holistic view of youth ministry. And without ruining too much, I don't want to go into too many details because Keith does a great job explaining what exactly that means and what it is. So I can't wait for y'all to hear this conversation for yourselves so y'all can be in on this conversation as well. It was a great one. I loved it and I can't wait for you to hear it.
All right. Well, without any further delay, here is Brent's conversation with Keith Parker.
Hey guys, welcome back to Student Ministry Conversations. I'm one of your hosts, Brent Aiken, and today I'm sitting down with Keith Parker. And so Keith, just like my last episode, Brian, I've known for a little while. We worked for a group called youthmen.org together for a little bit, and we got to meet each other and work together as we put out content and resources for youth pastors all over the world. And it was really an awesome opportunity. And it was a great pleasure and privilege to bring some of these guys back and have them on the show. And so today, Keith is going to be sitting down with us and talking with us about holistic ministry. But I want Keith to have a minute to introduce himself, tell us where you are, where you're from, all that fun stuff, how long you've been in student ministry, anything else you want to add.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much. And it's good to be with you. So I am a gray-haired youth pastor. It's always a popular thing. I've been in youth ministry since I was 19, which is also when I started going gray, which is a fun little bit of trivia. Probably a correlation there, I would guess. So I have been in youth ministry for 24 years, like I said. Started at a church in Indiana, central Indiana, called Hazelwood Christian Church. And I was their middle school, high school, and college age guy for about 17 years until 2017 when I moved to Greenford Christian Church in Northeast Ohio, where I am currently. And I've gone through a little transition over the last 2 years where I'm now overseeing our student ministry team. Of Billy Hartwig and Isaac Leimeister, who are awesome guys, awesome youth pastors. So I oversee them. I kind of help run our young adults ministry, and then I do adult discipleship as well. So that's kind of my ministry rundown. I got a great family, 3 boys that are 18, 15, and 11, and a wonderful wife who puts up with all my shenanigans. So got it pretty good.
There you go. Behind every great youth pastor is the spouse that is kind of begrudgingly some days just dragging behind us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so that's awesome. It's such a great introduction and talking about how you oversee the youth pastors that work at your church, because that's kind of the conversation that we're going to have today with the conversation about holistic ministry. And so for the people that might not be familiar with maybe that term, or for the people that just really don't have any experience in it at all, what is the importance of having a holistic approach to your ministry?
Yeah. And I think probably the most important thing we can do is like define that, because that may be a term that people aren't accustomed to. When I say that, what I mean is taking a 30,000 foot view of your ministry and seeing the big picture and allowing the mission and the purpose and the vision to really drive everything that you do. And honestly, looking at a student, and you could name them and you could say, man, little Timmy, he's coming into 6th grade this year, and he's going to be in my middle school ministry, then he's going to be in my high school ministry, then he's going to be in our young adults ministry. How are we going to take little Timmy on a discipleship journey where he learns the key biblical foundations, the key truths, he has the key relationships, the key conversations, so that when he does graduate and move into adult ministry, he is a full-fledged, full follower of Jesus who has a firm grasp of what his faith really looks like. That's kind of what I mean by that term. You can give props to Doug Fields if you want, or probably Rick Warren for purpose-driven if you want to use that term. Like, that's a good term. You can call it missional. You can call it upper room, like Will Mancini and Future Church. Call it whatever you want. But that's kind of what we're looking at, is like, how do you see the big picture and not just the little minutia that we get stuck in every day? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's something that's super important. And especially there's a lot of youth pastors out there that do kind of hit the ground running with no experience, but then on top of that, no guidance either. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times you have the new youth pastors that are coming into the scene. And I honestly was one of these as well. And thankfully I've had some great mentors over the years. But you have the youth pastors that kind of just jump in and they're like, all right, my goal is to get them through high school or get them through junior high. And I'm supposed to be here and hang out with them and like teach them about Jesus. And then hopefully at some point during the experience maturation that happens with student or with your job and your profession and like learning more about what you do, you begin to see that, oh man, like not only am I like teaching these kids, but I'm hopefully prepping them for their future as well. I'm not just telling them about Jesus. I want to have Jesus in such a way where it sticks past the time that I have them. And so,
absolutely.
Doug Fields and Rick Warren, like you said, purpose-driven life, purpose-driven youth ministry. They definitely kind of have the coin behind it, but it's a serious conversation to have. And so, other than those, there's obviously been a few things in our youth men circles over the past couple of years. I know Grow with their curriculum has really kind of pushed the scope and sequence mindset behind like having this long-term plan and having this discipleship structure that will hopefully bring students from point A to point B. But in y'all's conversations and your preparations for your church, how do y'all go about having that holistic viewpoint to where you're not looking at, just like you said, little Timmy when he enters sixth grade, but you're also looking at little Timmy when he's graduating as a senior? Right.
Yeah. And to be honest, I don't know if I answered your first question. I kind of identified the definition of what it is. But there's, I guess, the benefits that you asked, why is it so important? And before I answer your question there about, those conversations, I think that's huge. Like, why does it matter? And I think we all kind of do this. You said it really well. Like, youth pastors go to a church, they hit the ground running. Like, what does that typically mean? Well, it typically means that you're at the football game on Friday nights, you're running the lock-in, you're having the fifth quarter party, you're doing the retreats, you're doing all the stuff, like all the busy of doing ministry. And it is all ministry, but like sometimes we become really good event planners, or we become really good calendar fillers. And we forget that in the midst of jumping from one event to the next program, to the next scheduled thing or whatever, that there is this long-term journey that's happening. Like, we are in these relationships with these students, and we're bringing these leaders on, and they're signing up to invest in the lives of students. And we want to take them somewhere, not just show them a really good series of events and activities. So I think some benefits of what holistic ministry looks like. Number one, it gives you the why. Like, every single thing that you're looking at, like, what event are we going to do? Like, why are we doing that fifth quarter party that takes all sorts of time and energy? Why are we doing that lock-in? Why is anyone doing a lock-in? That's a great question, right? I mean, come on, like, what's the purpose? Like, if you're just doing it because it fills a calendar and you got to have something every month, but it doesn't drive your mission, or it doesn't help a student on their journey to follow Jesus, why? Like, it gives you purpose, it gives you clarity, it gives you focus. It helps you align with the larger church. Like, your church has a mission. And I've seen it so many times where the youth ministry has a different mission than the church's ministry. And you talk about confusing, you talk about why do students drop off the face of the earth when they move into adulthood? I think some of those things factor in, like, well, I was doing this and then we moved to adult ministry. It's a different thing. It's a different culture. It's different language. It's different purpose, different vision, different mission. That doesn't work. So having a holistic approach, like, the goal is not that they have a great high school ministry experience or middle school ministry experience. It's that they have a great experience following Jesus for the long haul. I love this one. It gives you permission to say no. I love saying no. It's so much fun. But like, it allows you to eliminate things that are extraneous, things that, how many times have we been in ministry where somebody's called us and like, hey, I have this great idea for something that the youth should do. They should come and they should clean out my gardens of all the weeds. That would be awesome. And you're like, okay, like, it just gives you, not that you can't do that and serve people and all that, but like, it gives you clarity and it gives you permission to say no, because it's not on purpose. It's not holistic. It's not part of the bigger picture. I think this one's good. It helps you know if you're winning. I think we all want to know if we're winning. Like, are we succeeding? When little Timmy goes from 6th grade to age 22, what does that look like? What are the things? What are the fruits that we see in Jimmy? I changed his name to Jimmy just now. He went from Timmy to Jimmy all of a sudden.
It was a Saul to Paul conversion. I mean, that's how good it was.
He's definitely a Jesus follower now for sure. But like, you can look at Timmy and you can identify like, hey, these are the things we want our students to know. When you take a big picture approach, like a superintendent of a school, like, this is what we want them to know when they graduate. And you can go, do they know it? Or did we do a poor job of teaching it? Are we winning? Like, I think that's way more helpful than counting noses and all that kind of stuff that tends to be the focus, right? Like, are we winning? Are we making disciples of Jesus? And what does that look like? What's the scorecard? And then I think, this is me being a nerd, but like, that superintendent vibe, like, I know that most youth pastors hear that and they're like, ugh, that's not a word I want applied to me, but it does allow you to create a comprehensive biblical training for your students. Like, what things do I think are crucial foundational truths of God's word that I need to teach throughout the time that they're a part of a 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, like, and what are they ready for? Like, what conversations are they ready for when they're a sophomore that they maybe weren't ready for in 6th grade? And I can help lay that whole thing out where now it's a journey that they're on from start to finish, instead of like, oh, let's do this thing. And then, I don't know, this sounds fun. And I saw this thing on Instagram. That sounds cool. Like, it's a big picture, a full course, full mission. Does that make sense? Am I rambling on? No,
that's perfect. I mean, you hit it right on in my mind. And I think the big thing is with that is like, you have, ultimately, you're the one with the roadmap. You're the one that is hopefully developing that plan of action or whatever you want to call it. But in the grand scheme of things, at the end of the day, it's just a discipleship strategy. That's all you're doing, is you're saying, hey, instead of hoping that your kids make faith-based choices in college or as young adults, saying, why don't we just teach them to do it so they do it? Like, right. One of my favorite illustrations that I've ever seen done is from a friend of mine. And when he's talking about the Great Commission, and he gets up in front of the church and like gets a person to come up and be his volunteer. And like, he gets them to teach him how to make a peanut butter jelly sandwich. But like, he takes every single word that they say literal. So if they're like, take some peanut butter, he like sticks his hand in the peanut butter jar and like just has a fistful of peanut butter. And it's like, nice. That's great. But in all the reality, like, I think youth pastors are just as guilty of this as other people. Like, a lot of people we get them to the point to where they know Jesus. And then we're like, hey, here's a Bible, figure out the rest.
Right.
And that's something that's going to ultimately lead to their destruction. Because unless they have the mentors and the other people that step in and guide that, you don't have anything to move off of that essential claim of Jesus being who he says he was. Yeah. You don't have the foundational elements built. And so go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think something that happens a lot A great example. I just took a group of college students to a Passion Conference down in Atlanta. And so, we're renting vans, we're driving down there, it's 13 hours from Northeast Ohio to Atlanta. It took us forever to get there. But anyway, long story short, we get back. I'm trying to catch up. It's a busy week of ministry, lots going on. And on Tuesday, I spent 2.5 hours filling out vouchers. Like, here's my receipts. Here's where we bought fuel in Tennessee. And here's how much it was. And here's what account it comes from. Like, when you're sitting there doing that, you're like, this is what I was called into by God Almighty. Like, it does not feel like a calling, but it is, it's part of it, but that's not where I want to live. And where I see a lot of youth pastors, and I was guilty of this for a long time, like, we live in that stuff. Like, we're figuring out the fun game we're going to play, and we're figuring out what snacks are we going to have, and we're filling out the vouchers, and we're helping with this, that, and the other. And all those things they're good, but good is the enemy of great, right? Like, I've heard so many youth pastors say, like, well, I just have been really busy. And so next week I'm going to set aside like an hour to really dream and really look at the big vision of my ministry. And it's like, I feel like that should be flipped. Like, it should be, I'm going to spend all this time. I'm really busy thinking about the big picture, and I'm going to schedule an hour to fill out vouchers, right? Like, that's the stuff. I think we have it backwards sometimes, and we become really good at that lower level stuff. And we miss the big picture because we're so busy running events and doing the mundane tasks that need to be done. And like, I don't know about you, but I don't think that's fun. Like, I'd rather see the big picture and help students follow Jesus wholeheartedly for their whole lives. And all of that plays a part in it. Like, you have to have a lower level to have an upper level, but I want to live in the upper level more. Yeah,
no, without a doubt. And the thing that keeps coming back to me is, like, Jesus didn't call us to be the party planning committee right. off of the office, but like, the whole premise behind it is like, I mean, there's so much more to ministry. And while those events are good, even when you think through events, like you said, are they worth it? But it also might even reevaluate your thinking and your planning and structure of like, okay, we've done this event. This is a thing that we do every single year. Like, it's unavoidable, inescapable. We have to do it. How can we change it to where it's being impactful towards the mission that we have? And so it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to destroy things or only do things that go into the mission, but we need to think and kind of collaborate and maybe revise a few of our things to say, hey, I know that we do, like, it's tradition. We've done a lock-in at this church for the past 25 years. Like, there's no way I'm going to get out of it. But what can I do during that time of a lock-in that will give us time to be intentional towards progressing these students in their relationship with Jesus? And whether that's saying like, hey, from 7 to 9 or whatever, like, we're just going to spend time in worship and prayer and everything else. And then the rest of the night can be goof off. But like, we still have that moment to dive in and get deep and get serious and have those life-changing conversations. But
I think a great example from that Passion Conference trip. So this is real world. Like, this is a conversation I had this week. We took our students to Passion Conference. We drove 13 hours one way. And if you've ever been to Passion, like, it's 60,000 people in a stadium. I mean, it's a big event. You can't do anything quickly. You can't go to the bathroom quickly. You can't get food quickly. You can't go anywhere quickly. Like, and everything is all stage driven. But one of our values is that we think circles are better than rows. Like, we think relational conversation is better than staring in one direction. And literally all we did for that weekend was stare in one direction. And it's great. Like, Passion, you're not going to get any better quality, like, communicators, worship leaders, technology. The show is unbelievable, and there's a wow factor there. But this week I'm looking at it going, was that worth it? Like, is there a better way where we could have like meaningful conversation, meaningful connection, And maybe we live stream some of the passion stuff, but we do it from a retreat center near us where we can have more relational connection and more conversation, because that drives the mission forward as opposed to the wow factor of driving down there. Like, that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about, is that big picture. Like, yes, this was good, but, and what you said, like, you can look at it and go, hey, we don't have to kill it, but how do we innovate it so that it matches our mission and contextualizes for our purposes better?
Yeah, definitely. And so you've kind of touched on this. I just want to make sure that you have enough room to adequately talk about everything. But is there any specific practices that you and your ministry specifically hold towards, like, making sure this kind of viewpoint and this kind of approach happens?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, making sure, like, I'm in a position where I oversee a team of people. So I've got more than one youth pastor we're doing life together. And so even the way that we sort of form our meetings is built around this. So this was pre-COVID, because COVID wrecked everything, but pre-COVID, when we were meeting and could actually be in the same rooms together, we would have 2 meetings a month as a student ministry team. And the first one we called our dreaming meeting. And it was all big picture conversations. It was, how are we doing on mission? What are the big rocks that we need to make sure we're hitting? So even setting that up in such a way that this conversation is not about how much are we paying for rental vans. That's not what we're doing here. Like, we're talking big rocks, big picture. What are we teaching? Where are we going? How are we communicating the mission? The second meeting we called our student ministry team nuts and bolts. And that was who's buying the chips? Like, that kind of stuff, right? Like, who's getting the forks? We need forks. So those kind of things, it helps to kind of balance out, like, yes, you got to have forks. That's important, but let's make sure the conversation that we really start with is the big picture stuff. I think to go into this, it's a lot of commitment. Like, it's easy to grab some downloads. And I know you asked me earlier about, like, some holistic, more holistic approaches from resource organizations like Grow. I think that's great. I think it's great that it's not just, here's a one-off sermon, here's some cool event ideas, here's what to do at your silent disco. Like, all that's fun. But I love that there's approaches now that are moving in a more holistic fashion. But I do want to caution, I don't think anybody, no matter how good they are, I don't think it's ever just plug and play. Like, you have to contextualize anything that you get, and it has to match your church's vision and mission. It has to match your context, your place, your ministry, your calling, like that. Yeah. Don't just download it on Sunday morning at 7 a.m. and go preach it and call it good. I love that they're moving that way. I think it can start the conversation, but I don't think it's ever just like, no, we're good. I downloaded that thing. We're good to go now. But committing to it, it's a marathon, not a sprint. When we went to Hazelwood 17 years before we left Hazelwood, we were there the first day. There was a preschool program on stage, and there was, like, how every preschool program has that kid, like, he's all over the place.
Oh yeah.
Like, there was that kid, and he was acting crazy. And I leaned over to my wife and I said, we're going to watch that kid graduate high school. And we just made the commitment. We were going to be there for the long haul. And he graduated high school, and he went into ministry, and he's doing ministry now. And it's like, it's just awesome. But you can't implement something like this and be like, we're on an 8-year plan, and then leave in a year and a half. Like, you won't see the fruit of this sort of a thing. So you got to be committed to it, and you got to stick with it. I think you got to give away leadership. This is a big thing. And when you communicate this to your volunteers, you got to give them an opportunity to own it. It's one thing to say it. It's another thing for them to, like, express it. And so they'll internalize it when they get a chance to use it. And then I think communicate, always sneeze the virus. That's really apt saying for this time in life. Am I right? Sneeze the virus. That's exactly what everybody.
That is perfect. No one will ever forget Sneeze the virus.
Sneeze the virus. Yeah. Like, you gotta keep saying it. Like, this is where we're going. This is the mission. At Hazelwood, our mission statement was connect, worship, grow, serve. And I would say it, and my adult leaders would like roll their eyes and groan because they'd heard it so many times, but they all knew it.
Yep.
Like, they could all articulate it. They knew what it meant. They knew how it worked. So
yeah, no, that's awesome. And so, yeah, I think that there's definitely some great, like, obviously there's great development and great growth that comes from this. And like you said, having that commitment and like committing to that long-term goal, not only will it allow you to see growth, but it builds trust. It builds all kinds of things within the ministry to where they know that you're going to be there for a while. And that's whether you're one youth pastor by yourself, whether that's you have a associate or like maybe an intern or something like that, or you're a multi-church, multi-site, whatever. That factor of trust is huge. And kids will not buy into what you're doing, and volunteers really won't even buy into what you're doing without them knowing that you're going to be there to back it as well. And so obviously with this though, there are some things that are great practices and great steps towards doing that. Like you said, communicate regularly, make sure you're on the same page with everybody, stuff like that. What are some potential roadblocks that you could come into play with? Because obviously with every good thing, there's always some bad things. And this was not on our questions, so I'm kind of throw you under the bus here. But I think it's a great question to have, because with anything good, you have to plan for the potential hiccups and the potential roadblocks. And obviously with an 30,000 feet view, you're still going to run into some roadblocks, but it might be roadblocks that you've never run into before.
Yeah. Sorry, that's my dryer, in case you hear that buzz. So I'm sitting in my living room and my dryer is really loud. Hang on, I'm going to turn it off. Otherwise it's going to buzz 4 more times. Yeah, that's a great question. What roadblocks are there? Silence. Sorry. They can edit that, right?
Yeah. So yeah, we'll just basically I'll clap and then you can like restart and answer the question, and Russell will just edit it out. Okay. So
perfect.
Whenever you're ready.
All right, hit me. Yep. Yeah. I mean, there are always going to be roadblocks, always going to be difficult things whenever you try something new. So one of the biggest things I would say is, the biggest obstacles is owning this and doing the hard work to make this work in your context specifically. And I can actually tell you how it played out. Our church, and I won't say which church, our church that I was at many moons ago, they had a mission statement that was very, very old school and very convoluted. It was so many words. It was like a book. And so I was on staff and could not articulate the mission statement of our church. It was bad. So we shortened it in our youth ministry. You know, I said, you should have alignment with your larger church. And I was that guy who did not. So do as I say, not as I do. But we changed it. We changed our statement to connect, worship, grow, serve. And I literally sat down and I did the spade work and I created, this holistic approach. There were 2 major key pillar foundational truths under connect, under worship, under grow, under serve. So 8 foundational truths we wanted every student to know when they graduated, very similar to the 7 checkpoints of like Andy Stanley. We were 1 better than Andy Stanley. We were 8, he was only 7.
Strive for greatness. What can I say?
But that did the hard work, did the spade work, got into the word, contextualized it, prayed over it, and then cast the vision, and away we went. And it took off like gangbusters. Well, many, many years later, our youth ministry was doing really well. And our eldership at the church decided they wanted to revamp the mission statement of the church. And they went, You know what seems to be working really well? It's that youth ministry stuff. They got that connect, worship, grow, serve thing going on. That seems to resonate. Let's go with that. And so they took that motto and they slapped it on the church logo, and it didn't really change anything. Like, it didn't move anything. They just kept doing everything they were doing with a new logo and a new statement. That's a definite pitfall. Like, you got to be careful, and you got to know that it's not like, well, I can just take the mission statement of somebody else and just throw it on there and it's going to be fine. It literally has to shape every single thing that you do. And that's hard work. And it takes a lot of like time and energy and direction, and you got to revamp it and revisit it and be willing to change it and make it work. That to me is the biggest pitfall, because everybody's got a mission statement. Everybody's got a vision statement. Everybody's got a cool website. So it's easy to go like, I'm going to grab that. I'm going to steal that one. That one's good. But if it doesn't drive everything. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. And that brings up a good thought process behind it. It's like, what's the point of a mission statement if it doesn't drive what you're doing?
Right.
Like if you literally have words on your building that you're not following, like take the words down. Like there's no point in them being there. I mean, and it doesn't have to be y'all's mission statement's great, but like every church, every organization is going to have different mission statements, and it's not necessarily the words that are behind them. It's the thought process, the prayer, and the intentionality that drive those words into the actions of the church. Because ours is really, really simple. Ours is love God, love people, offer Christ. And like, it's super, super simple, but in all reality,
you guys were one better than Jesus. He only had love God, love people. You threw another one in there. So
well, we kind of took the Great Commission and like, that was our third, but I mean, like, but so I like it. With that, like, it's not love God, love people, offer Christ that changes anything. But we have to look at that and we have to say, all right, how are we loving God? How are we teaching people to engage with God in a way that is loving, in a way that is like teaching them to be reverent and like just completely in awe of who God is? And then how are we taking that love that we have for God and shifting it to where we can express it outwards towards pushing towards other people, so we can love God and like love people with that same kind of love that God has for us. And then like, how does that expression of love bring us into conversation to where we can offer Jesus? And so if that's not what we're doing, like the words don't mean anything.
Right.
So make sure that you don't just put words out there. And you said like you did the separate mission statement from your church. I totally did that too at my last church.
We're both guilty.
Yeah, totally did that too at my last church. But it was the same kind of premise. It was like the church, my last church was like, the so-and-so church exists to make disciples of all nations and proclaim the gospel and the good news of Jesus Christ, and like had like 2 or 3 more sentences after it. And it was like, man, that is a lot. And so I took it and I was like, look, we're here to engage, equip, and encourage, equip, and encourage. And so like we started thinking through, might be nerdy as well, but I mean, who knows?
That's all right. So, that's good.
But so we took that and ran with it, and like started developing this whole process behind each of them. And like, there's no point unless you have the back end behind and you're able to say, hey, we say this, but this is what we mean and what we want to see out of it. This is the second one. This is what we mean. This is what we see, kind of thing like that. And if you can't accurately and concisely explain that, like, you're wasting your time.
Yeah. So a good example would be my last church was connect, worship, grow, serve. That was our mission statement. My church that I'm at currently, the mission statement is to make disciples of Jesus who make disciples of Jesus. So kind of begs the question, like when you start digging in, like what's the spade work? How do we make that happen in the lives of a student? Kind of begs the question, like, what's a disciple?
Yeah.
Like if I'm making a disciple, what's a disciple? So we define that. A disciple puts Jesus first. They love others. They share everything, which is their time, talent, treasure, and testimony. and they are fruitful. They make other disciples. So now I've got these 4 pillars, these 4 key components of a disciple that I can start working through with 6th graders, 7th graders, 8th graders. Like, what does that look like in the life of a 7th grader? What does it mean to be fruitful? Like, it might be different than it is for a 45-year-old guy, Yeah. So how do we do that? And how do we take the picture of what the church is driving and the mission that we're on, and how do we make that work for every student in our ministry? How do we guide them through that process? So the other obstacle I was going to mention, and I think this is the opposite side, one is to just slap a motto on it and make it sound cool. The other is to be tempted to fall back into old youth ministry practices just because it's convenient and it's easy, to kind of default back into well, we're going to do a big event because, I'm a youth pastor and I want to have a big event that I can MC and it's going to be great. That's great. But if it doesn't accomplish your mission, then don't do that. I love what Isaac Leimeister, our high school pastor, is doing currently. Just launched it 2 weeks ago. We have in our area, it's a very rural area in Northeast Ohio, church of 2,000 people driving in from all over the place. We actually have 27 high schools represented in our high school ministry. So crazy, but there are all these little pockets of communities all over the place. So Isaac said, how do we help students share their time, talent, treasure, and testimony? How do we help them be fruitful? Well, let's set them up to be leaders and to impact their community. So now he's started this thing. Instead of having midweek where we all come to the church and hang out, where everybody's driving 25 minutes, he's set up a thing called HSM Anywhere. And it's in students' homes, in those communities, in those places. So there's 8 or 9 of them that are happening 30 minutes from the church, where we don't have a church or a campus, but it's a student opening their home. And then he provides a video that they utilize and they lead their friends through a small group. It's them empowered. And it makes total sense for what our mission is. And like I said, he just launched it last week, and we've already seen 200% growth in our high school ministry on our Wednesday night attendance. And we've met 15 new students in the last 2 weeks that have never darkened the door of our church because of this thing that he's doing. And it's
wow.
Yeah, it's awesome. And it
That's
fits
amazing.
with our mission, fits with our purpose, fits with our direction. And it helps students understand, I'm on mission. I'm making an impact in my community.
That's awesome. That's really cool. But I think that hits the nail on the head once again. Just the premise of I think so many times, especially you talk about the old youth ministry methods. A lot of times we let the old church methods kind of drive our functioning as well. And somehow or another down the line, this idea that we have to be in the building for church to happen, is not the case. And if anything, I think that's one of the best things about the past couple of years of quarantining and everybody moving to virtual. Yep. Is it really, really shook the doors off of some places that have been barred shut for a really, really long time. And for the ones that just absolutely refuse to open those doors, they're not here anymore. And so it just begs the question of Jesus did do ministry in churches. He went to synagogues, don't get me wrong, but his greatest moments of teaching were outside of the walls. And so we have that same opportunity. And the thing is we're just like you said, 200% growth. You wouldn't have experienced that any other way. You wouldn't have had that opportunity if you hadn't taken what y'all were doing to those different communities, which is one of those, once again, looking at 30,000 feet above, are we genuinely doing what we're supposed to do? Is this something that we are doing, or can we do it better? Can we do it in a different way that reaches more kids? And that's awesome. That's an incredible ministry opportunity. And then ultimately on top of that, y'all are doing exactly what your mission statement was, which was make disciples who make disciples. And
let me step out of my oversight pastor role. one of the HSM Anywheres meets at my house, and my 18-year-old son leads it. And so as a dad, I'm getting to welcome all these students from our community into my home, and B, I'm getting to watch my son like lead and learn what ministry looks like, and send texts to his friends and invite them to our house and to be a part of this thing. Like, all of that is huge. Like, and I'm loving it as a dad as much as I'm loving it as a pastor.
That's awesome. That is so cool. And so, I mean, shoot, that's amazing. Obviously there's tons of different factors that we've discussed back and forth through this that make this effective. But I think the biggest thing, and we've kind of touched on it a little more, I just wanted to make sure that you had ample time to say everything you wanted to say, is, especially with the 30,000 feet view, if you don't have a dedicated staff of youth pastors, and even a lot of times in this regard, you still have to have it. None of this like long-term, long-scale teaching plan and discipleship strategy works without the buy-in of volunteers. And so how do you get volunteers on board to this long-term approach? And then how do you effectively continue to keep them on board? Or do y'all have to deal with a lot of ins and outs of volunteers like swapping?
No, I think this is a little like life hack for youth pastors, because I think sometimes when we ask people, hey, would you sign on and help out with our middle school ministry? Like, the initial knee jerk for most people is hang out with a bunch of middle school kids. No, thanks. I don't want to do that, especially when it's like, it's going to mean overnighters and retreats and time away. And that sounds terrible. When you invite them into something with a long-term purpose, I think people are more apt to say yes, and they're more apt to be involved and plugged in and excited, because they know that it's going somewhere. It's not just we're going to do this event, and then we're going to do that event, and then we're going to do this event. It's lifelong investment. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And so when I began the process of inviting people onto our team, this is where I started. I didn't start with, hey, we think you're super cool and we think the kids will love you. Like, we started with, here's the big picture of where we want our ministry to go, and here's what we want our students to learn. And we think that you can be a part of that because we see some of these traits in you, and we think your investment in the lives of these students is going to make a difference. And so most people will sign up for that, even people that you wouldn't think would sign up for that. And so I think that continuous communication, and then once you have them on board, reminding them along the way that sometimes those things that are like, they had to deal with the kid who was, doing the stupid stuff and spraying water all over the bathroom, and, all the nonsense that happens in youth ministry or whatever, like reminding them that there's a bigger picture and a bigger purpose at play. And when you keep reminding them over and over again, and they're like, yeah, that's right. I know we're going to get somewhere. It's nice because I was the kid spraying water all over the bathroom in my own youth group. So I could be like, listen, maybe it won't all end up for bad. Like, maybe he'll go into youth ministry. Who knows? So yeah, I think just continuously reminding them of the mission, pointing out that this is a long-term thing. And so I did not have a lot of turnover along the way, because I think people were like, I see the big picture here. Or maybe I just got lucky.
Yeah. I love how you immediately valued, like, you immediately gave the volunteers that you sought after value. It wasn't like hey, come back in a year and I'm going to tell you how important you were. It was like, we are doing this. These are the steps that we're going to take. We see those qualities in you, and we want you to model those for the students. Like, you immediately gave them value. You immediately gave them worth in a program that they're considering at that point. But like, hook, line, and sinker, they're already bought, because you're giving them value for the ministry. And then you're also giving them a plan of where you want to go. Like, that is the best way that you can get a volunteer. Because man, who wouldn't buy into that? Hey, we're going to go change the lives of these students and we're going to change it with XYZ. And we see that you really, really do those well. And we would be honored for you to be a part of this kind of thing. Like, who wouldn't want to jump in on that? So
and another piece of that puzzle is, when I ask somebody to sign on, it was never for anything less than a year-long commitment. It was never like, hey, why don't you come check it out? And if you don't like it after 6 weeks, like, we can just reevaluate. It was like, we would like for you to be a part of it. And we would like you to commit for this entire school year, because your presence is going to speak volumes to the students in our ministry. And that's how you build relationships, is being present. So it might mean ping pong, it might mean eating pizza, it might mean staying up late, but your presence at these things is going to be the thing that moves the needle. So we want you to commit to a full year. After a year, if you're dying, if your life circumstances have changed, if whatever, like, we'll talk again. But usually what happened is that year would come around and they'd go, oh no, I'm in. Like, I'm in long term. And we left Hazelwood 4.5 years ago. And the student ministry team, many of the people that are still on that team were people that were on my team for long term. So it's awesome to see that ministry, that investment in the lives of students continues, even beyond, which, I mean, I would hope every pastor would say that. I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about him. And so that's a cool thing.
Yeah. And I think that's something that is massively not prepared for. And I wrote a blog about it on the Student Ministry Conversations site that has been referenced a time or two, but it's like, we're not building a legacy of us. And I think that's one of the other beautiful things about that 30,000 foot view is it's impossible to get that high up and still think of yourself, because you are not the one pulling all the like bells and whistles. You're not making everything work. If you're looking that high up off the ground, you have to have volunteers in place that are doing the work. And you're just there to basically encourage and equip the volunteers. And then they're doing the work, and you're sitting there and saying, man, you just kind of get to not necessarily just sit back and watch, but because I mean, I don't like that terminology, because you still do work, but you get to enjoy the aspect of the ministry that's happening. And it's not that you're so like head down in the trenches where like you can't even like look up to breathe. You actually get to enjoy the process of the ministry that's happening.
Yep.
So yeah, very, very good stuff. So outside of this conversation, we've talked about a few things, obviously, with the purpose-driven youth ministry, Doug Fields, everything like that. But do you have any resources or anything like that you'd recommend people go look at?
Well, for $99.99, you can buy no, I'm just kidding. I don't have any cool stuff like that. There is a church book that I've started reading. It's not youth ministry specific, but I think it speaks to this. Will Mancini wrote this book. It's called Future Church. And it talks a ton about the upper room and the lower room of ministry. And that we spend a lot of our time on the lower room stuff, which is your programs, your people, your places, and your personality, the 4 Ps. But the constant with those 4 things is those things always change, right? So how do we live in that upper level? I think I've actually only read like the first 3 or 4 chapters of this, and I'm already like, yes, I'm totally on board with where you're going here. So I think that's a good read. I think just general calling and purpose of like bearing fruit, that idea. There's an old book called The God-Bearing Life by Kenda Creasy-Dean. And I think that's a great reminder that we didn't get in this to fill out vouchers and run lock-ins. We got into this to bear fruit and to point people to Jesus. So those are more encouragement, I would say, than they are like nuts and bolts. But yeah, those would be helpful, I would say. I don't even know if I have a good nuts and bolts. I think purpose-driven youth ministry is probably the best one. And I will admit, I only made it through like the first 5 or 6 chapters of that one when I first got into ministry. And I don't know why, but the idea had just resonated with me so hard that I was just like, this seems like so common sense. We should definitely ask the why before we do stuff. Why do you need to tell me that in a book? And I didn't finish it. So sorry, Doug Fields, I love you.
It happens. But in all reality, like, is there a better compliment to Doug's writing than like the point was so driven in the first couple of chapters that you could put down the book and run with it? Like,
there you go. Yep.
Super, super cool. And I mean, like we talk about Doug Fields on this podcast all the time because of the legacy that he's built for like just generation after generation of youth ministry. But like,
absolutely,
that's a principle that's never going to leave. And it really needs to be something that is constantly brought back to the forefront of your attention is, are we really doing this for the why, or are we just doing this because? And getting into we do it because as a dangerous trap.
Right.
Because
keep the plate spinning.
Yeah. Like eventually the plate's going to fall. But fantastic stuff. And then the only other thing that I would throw in as far as resources is obviously in order for this 30,000 feet thing to work, you have to continue to develop yourself as a leader. And you have to continue to drive towards making yourself more efficient, making yourself more of a communicator, and not necessarily more of a communicator as in you talk more, but how effective you are as a communicator. And so with that, there's all kinds of books and stuff like that out there. But the resource that I go back to time and time again is another podcast that I listen to all the time. Me and Russell are both very, very big fans. If you don't listen to Carey Nieuwhof's leadership podcast, it needs to be on your list because he brings in anybody and everybody from just about every organization and every field known to man, and like just sits down and talks about ministry. Not talks about ministry, sits down and talks about leadership ideas. Yeah. And I mean, if you really want to enhance being a leader, like why not learn from some of the leaders of like Fortune 500 companies that have been like driving teams and workforces of hundreds of thousands of people? Like seriously, you can't do better. So I would definitely throw that in the list too. And if you've listened to this podcast, you've heard me and Russell both reference that podcast probably 100 times. Just because we both really, really buy into the value of that. And there's a lot of great insight to it. Yeah. But developing yourself as a leader, you have to do it. And ultimately, like you have to make yourself better in order to be better for the volunteers that you have under you and the other staff that you have under you.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, man. So other than that, like we are pretty much rounding out the end of our conversation. How can people connect with you on social media? If you want to share your church or anything like that, like this is your shameless plug moment where you can tell everybody anything and everything you have going on. If you do any side projects, anything like that, or if you just want to say, hey, love to talk, shoot me an email or shoot me a message on social media, kind of thing like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how much they would get out of my social media, Instagram accounts. They can watch like what are my workouts from the morning and here's a weird picture of my dog and that kind of stuff. But it's at kparker170 is my Instagram and my Twitter. And then I'm obviously on the good book, Facebook. So yeah, I would love to have more conversations. I'm in a lot of these youth pastor groups. Love to see, see these young leaders that are learning and growing and asking questions. So if I can ever help by telling you all the ways I messed it up, like I can help you avoid the pitfalls. So yeah, I would love that. I'm at Greenford Christian Church. So if you want to check out our church's website, it's greenfordchristian.org. And our church, our team does a great job with online ministry, just video elements and worship pieces. Man, the team here is really, really solid. So if you're looking for ideas or want to check it out, that'd be a good place to go.
Well, all right, man. As we end, thank you for the fantastic conversation. It was awesome to catch up with you again.
You too.
We look forward to hopefully seeing and hearing more from you in the future, whether it's on your own ministry stuff or if we collaborate again. But as far as the episode goes, this is it, guys. We love you guys. Thank you for all the ministry that you do and continue to do. And we hope that this helps in any way possible. And we hope to see you next week. See you later.
Hey, thanks everybody for joining us today. We hope you were encouraged and inspired by this week's episode and that you found something that you can use as you continue to pour into the lives of your students.
Yeah, if you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, we would ask that you leave a comment and a rating on whatever platform you're listening to us on. We would appreciate that so much. Also, maybe you know someone who would benefit from this conversation. Take a moment and share this with them on social media, tag them, and then also tag us at Talk Student Men on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can also now support our podcast financially with a monthly supporter option, or you can purchase merchandise on our store at studentministryconversations.org. Both of those go directly back into the podcast to help our equipment costs and everything else to make this podcast better for you guys. Now, Russell, you have next week's episode. What do we have in store for the podcast next week?
Yeah, next week I get to sit down and talk with Lisa Gill, and she's a friend of mine in our conference for youth ministry, and we talk about continuing education, not just classes and seminary, but little things that you can do to continue to grow more in develop yourself and develop your leadership as you continue in youth ministry. So it's a great conversation, and I look forward to you hearing it.
Man, that sounds great. I can't wait to hear the conversation next week. Just a reminder, be sure to go to studentministryconversations.org for show notes and links from this episode. Just search for this week's episode number in the search bar. And then we also have other helpful articles and blog posts on there as well. Again, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week.